Before I turn it over to Michael, a quick plug for the Wagner. As I said, this program, like much of what we do, is free of charge. It's our mission to make programs widely accessible, something we've managed to do for 165 years. We've adapted rather quickly to try to make our programs, which are usually in person, available online while our building is closed, but we do need support to make that happen. So if you enjoy the program tonight, which I'm sure you will, and if you'd like to see more of these kind of programs, I hope you'll consider making a donation or joining the Wagner. To those of you who are members or contributed to this program, we're really grateful. We thank you. This is not possible without the support of many people. And now I'm delighted to turn the program over to our speaker, Michael Lewis.
Thanks, Sue. I'm going to go right to share screen. Before I begin, I want to say two things. First, thank you, all you librarians who have helped me with this talk. The Wagner Librarians, Lynn Dorwalt, her predecessor, Penny Baker, you've been a big help. Librarians in Philadelphia, Sarah Weatherwax at the Library Company, Ken Finkel, all the great things you've written on Hidden City, Hidden Philadelphia. Hannah Bennett, former director of the Furness Library at the University of Pennsylvania. And I see a lot of librarians are watching this talk. I am not a librarian. You will find fault being librarians with my technical and professional errors. But I'm not worried about that, because presumptuously, I think the library story is something we all understand intuitively. Let me just begin by saying we're in a city with one of the great libraries of this country. The Free Library of Philadelphia is a fabulous building. What a superb piece of architecture. It's got two temple fronts, two pediments, like a Greek temple, but pushed to the side rather than a pompous upheaval of ornament in the middle. You have a graceful opening of a colonnade saying this is a place for the people. Bookended at either end with these symbols of dignity and grace. The architect was Horace Trumbauer, and he worked on it a long time. He got the job in 1907. The building didn't open to 1926. It was under construction longer than the Parthenon was. But the funny thing about it, the building didn't change much. I'm showing you renderings from the beginning and the middle of the design process. Nothing really changed. Look, they changed the side of the building a little to make it sleeker between 1912 and 1916. In fact, what really changed is they got rid of horse-drawn vehicles in the foreground. That tells you how long that American transportation has changed while the building is slowly rising. And the reason the building didn't change much in those 15 years of design, because the exterior was already predetermined. It is the Ministry of the Marine, the Place de la Concorde in Paris from about 1745. And it is a line for line, molding for molding, stone for stone copy. Very, very few changes. So what happened in the near 20 years of design and construction is that the initial idea was refined and improved and perfected, giving Philadelphia one of its greatest monuments. But it's not the only great library we have. We have the University of Pennsylvania's library by Frank Furness, perhaps his greatest standing work. This is the building I went to graduate school in. And the building is a flagrantly defiant act of architectural aggression. And we'll see why a little later on in the talk. It's flaming red. Furness was very conscious that his name was a pun on truth and fire, Frank Furness. And the building blazes in red sandstone, red terracotta, red brick, inconceivably red, literally inconceivable. When photographs of the building were sent to Germany to have a postcard issued, the artist there charged with colorizing it couldn't conceive that the building was this red, and they rendered it safely muted in bands of brownstone. So we've got a calm library, an aggressive library, and we've got a mausoleum of a library the old Ridgeway Library, brought in Catherine Street, no longer a library since the 1960s, by Addison Hutton. Maybe this is our most Quaker library. If you look at the dates of the building, it was designed in 1870, and yet it's Greek Revival. It's a style that is now 40 years out of date, being built in Victorian Philadelphia. And it reminds me very much of the Quaker attitude towards fashion, where it's very important that you would wear sober, calm clothing, preferably 1 or 2 generations out of date, but of the finest fabric, the finest worsted wool. So here you've got a building which is of the finest cut granite, but draping a style that's at least 2 generations out of date. Now let me show you our newest library. This is the Charles Library at Temple University, which opened a year ago by the fabulously inventive firm of Snowhead, this Norwegian-American international firm. And we'll talk about this. So we've got all kinds of libraries in the city, and I'm going to do something foolhardy and try to make some generalizations about it. And I want to make an argument that there is such a thing as a Philadelphia library. Now, right away, you can see that it's an impossible task because these buildings ricochet pinwheel fashion in every possible direction. But I want to look at the family resemblance. And to do that, we have to talk about the typology of a library. What are the fixed and unchanging properties that all libraries have? And it's really an anatomical exercise. And it reminds me of what we do when we look at birds. These birds are all different, and they all have a different anatomy because their beak has a different job. Is it to crack nuts? Is it to tear flesh? Is it to scoop sand, look for crustaceans? Is it a straw in the hummingbird? Does it hunt by day or by night? So if you look at that, they're all modifications of the same elements that have been specialized for special tasks. And the library consists fundamentally of a space for storing books and a space for reading books. So that's going to be our assignment tonight, to look at the way the beak, as it were, of the library is modified in Philadelphia. Now, Philadelphia, as a cultural city in America, has a special place. Most of the great 17th century colonial cities were founded for religious reasons. That is, Philadelphia, Boston, Hartford, Connecticut, Providence, Rhode Island. The names tell you, Providence, it's a religious refuge. The Quakers of Philadelphia, though, had a special identity in that they did not have ministers, unlike the Puritans of New England. The Quaker meeting house did not have a central pole of power. There was no pulpit in the Quaker meeting house. And if you look at the grid of Philadelphia, devised by William Penn in 1682, in a way, it is a Quaker meeting house turned into a city, an egalitarian grid punctuated by regularly spaced public squares. No converging diagonals at some central palace. So the square at the center is no different than the squares around it. So as in a meeting house, there is equality is the theme. Because there's no minister, everyone is free to speak. And I love this naive 1801 painting of a Quaker meeting house. All the men are wearing hats, except the man who takes off his hat, hangs it over his head on a peg to speak from the heart. Not from the mind, but from the heart. It's very important. This is the Quaker inner light, that a great show of education, intellect, some cascade of Latinate learning does not pour forth out of the sincere heart. So the Quaker style is plain speech because, not having ministers, they did not need universities to train ministers. And maybe the finest statement of this Philadelphian attitude towards learning is that we extract from the will of Stephen Girard, who created Girard College in North Philadelphia, where he wrote out with wonderful specificity, the dimensions of every room of his building and the whole program of the curriculum. At the end, he said, in case you missed the point, after he tells them not to teach the pupils Greek and Latin, teach them the modern commercial languages of French and Spanish. To sum it up, he said, I would have them taught facts and things rather than words and signs. This is pragmatic learning, not intellectual, metaphysical speculation. And that is the program, that is the intellectual program, that is the foundation of Philadelphia's libraries. And it begins with our first library, the Library Company, which was founded by Benjamin Franklin and his friends in 1731. And at the cornerstone of their building, when they finally got to build it in 1789, there's a wonderful statement written by Franklin, be it remembered in honor of the Philadelphian youth, then chiefly artificers. He's referring to 1731 when it was founded. That is, artificer is an archaic word for craftsman. That is, they are practical makers of things. And they created the Library Company, which is our first library as institution and our first library building. And there it is, as designed in 1789 by William Thornton, a surgeon who had never designed a building. And he said later with some chagrin that he began to study architecture at the age of 29, at the same moment he began to compete for an architectural prize. And this is the building, taken from an English pattern book. It's an essay in Palladian architecture. Benjamin Franklin did not live to see it open, but in honor of him, if you look right above the door, a statue of Franklin was placed, now, alas, in sadly mutilated condition. And like a saint with his attributes, the attribute of Benjamin Franklin are the stack of books that he leans his arm on. It's significant, though, that it took them more than half a century to build this library. Because when they opened, they didn't have many books. They had about 8,000 volumes. And to understand that, it's necessary for us to go back a little and see what the library is. We use the word library, which comes from the Latin liber, but almost every other country in the world uses the Greek word bibliothek, bibliotheca. And it's a compound word, two parts, biblion, meaning book, theca, meaning box, shelf, counter, a chest. Interesting, biblion is not even a Greek word. It comes from the Egyptian biblos, which is the Egyptian word for papyrus, and it probably comes from the Phoenician city of Byblos, where parchment was imported by the Greeks from the Levant. So it's a loan word. I'm interested in the word theca. I studied in Germany, as Susan Glassman told you, and it's a great word in Germany. Theca means a bar, literally the bar of a bar. You go to the theca. And that word survives in a lot of words all over European language. Pinakothek is the German word for a box of paintings or a painting gallery. Our word discotheque comes from that. And the word apothecary also is a chest of things. It's the word for a pharmacist. And even the word boutique comes from theca. I just learned this preparing for this talk. It comes from the Middle Provençal, the Occitan word botica, which is really apotheca. It's the same word. So apothecary and boutique are the same word. But enough of philology. This word tells us that the library at first was not a building, and it wasn't even a room. It was merely a chest of books. And after the collapse of the classical Roman world, the Roman Empire, with the great loss of books, except for Constantinople, where into the 1450s, classical libraries survived, we have the great destruction of the libraries of classical antiquity. So here, the first of our modern monastic libraries, the collection shown is this depiction of the scribe Ezra. His library is really just a box of books. that is all that's left. So books are precious, valuable things. They are copied lovingly. There's no printing yet. They're copied lovingly, manuscript by manuscript, in the scriptorium of a monastery, which gives us the components of the modern library. One of the components the monastic cloister gave us is the book carrel, where the monk could read by the cloisters and study in contemplative solitude. This is the one in Gloucester. Now, eventually, the monastic collection is formalized with the creation of the university. We now have libraries in a way we would understand them as a reading room. This is the greatest of them all, by the greatest of Renaissance architects, painters, sculptors, Michelangelo. This is the Laurentian Library. So this is a very elegant, gracefully proportioned reading room. But where are the books? Well, there aren't that many books yet. We're in the infancy of printing, so books remain rare and valuable things which are chained to the desk so they are not stolen. So there is no separation yet between the storage of books and the reading of books. The books are too precious to leave out of sight. And this is the culture out of which the library company was designed. And if you walked through that door, the building was 40 by 70, you would find an interior that Michelangelo would have understood. You sit in chairs and you read the books that are at arm's length. This is a gentleman's library, and Philadelphia had a great number of these. Some of them still survive. The library of the Pennsylvania Hospital, an exquisite room. If you have a chance to visit it, this gives you an inkling of the scale, proportions, the richness of materials. The books carefully guarded in locked cases. Another one of these great early reading room libraries is the Athenaeum of Philadelphia, another space you ought to visit. There would have been a great many more. For example, the Apprentices Library. The name tells you these are not wealthy. The Benjamin Franklin's library company was a subscription library you had to pay. Now, you shouldn't think of that as too elite, because anybody could borrow a book there if they provided a deposit equal in value to the book. So it was a public library in a sense. The apprentices moved from building to building rather shabbily. For a time they were in the Carpenters Company, they were a time the Old Mint. And here they are, very kindly, the free Quakers let them into their meeting house in the 1850s, almost to the end of the century. But there were even smaller personal libraries. This, to my eye, was the greatest of all. This is Horace Howard Furness's Shakespeare Library in his row house on Washington Square, designed by his brother, Frank Furness, the architect. What I love about this, the Furness brothers were brought up in a Unitarian household, and Unitarians did not have altars in their churches. They only had a pulpit, the spoken word. All the religious belief poured out in this Shakespearean library, which is a shrine and altar to William Shakespeare. There is his death mask at the center, place where the crucifix would be over a Catholic altar. So Furness is the great Philadelphia builder of libraries, for which reason he was chosen to design the new building for the Mercantile Library, a Greek Revival building of 1844. Rather cheap building. It's in the Greek Revival, but that magnificent portico is a bit of a sham. The capitals and the base of the columns are not marble, they're cast iron. And the columns themselves aren't stone, they're brick that has been plastered into. So they're working on a shoestring budget, plastered into classicism. In 1867, the library is grotesquely overcrowded. A new library is needed. And the library buys a defunct market house at 10th just off Sansom Street. And it's a perfect shell of a building. If you think of it, these roaming, pelagic, wandering Philadelphia libraries are like hermit crabs looking to inhabit a new shell for a time. And a market house is a perfect shell because there's nothing in it but one great barn of space. Incidentally, I'm just showing you, take a look at that roof truss to span this 60-foot in the case of this one, 80-foot span, you need a light metal and wooden roof truss, and it's very similar to the roof truss of the Wagner Free Institute of Science. And if some of you have not yet visited the Wagner Free Institute, 17th and Montgomery, I urge you to do it. So Frank Furness is given the task of insinuating into this barn of space a modern library. And we have his first sketch in his sketchbook in the collection of a great-grandson of Furness. And he does something curious. He draws an oval with radiating wings about it. It tells you from the beginning he's exploring a new type of library design called the panopticon. And actually, this is a plug for the college I teach at, Williams College. Our first library, there it is, a 48-foot octagon, which was designed as a panopticon. On the right is the main story. One librarian would sit eagle-eyed at the epicenter, watching jealously the 8 slices of the pie where the students borrowed books. Actually, not too keenly. We were still a theological seminary, and pretty much all the books were editions of the Bible. Anyway, this idea of 1846 at Williamstown had a peculiar resonance in Philadelphia, where we have the great panopticon building of the world, Eastern State Penitentiary, the model for all subsequent penitentiaries. What Furness did was adapt that plan to library use. At the top is the first plan, a little too expensive. Eventually, he eliminated the grand stair you see around here to the left. But he kept the idea of separate reading rooms for men and women at the back. He made them larger. He moved the newspaper room upstairs. And that's the Mercantile Library as it opened in 1869. A radically modern idea for a library. What was radical about it is that you did not need to order your book from the librarian. And they calculated, this is wonderful Philadelphia pragmatism, they calculated that book theft would actually be less per year than the cost of hiring extra watchmen to guard the books. Radically modern, and like many radically modern things, it didn't work. It didn't work because people keep writing books. It had a capacity at peak of about 90,000, but just 5 years later, by 1873, they were verging on 150,000. And what they had to do was eliminate the panopticon, straighten out the shelves, and ultimately put a gallery on top. So what you're looking at is the great crisis of the 19th century library. And the crisis is three parts that made the books cheap, affordable, and in reach of everyone. The first, with the Industrial Revolution, is the steam press. A printing press tells you have to press the plate down by hand. But with steam power, you're now able to do this automatically with great steam powered presses. This is the printing plant of Harper's Brothers in New York that printed Harper's Weekly, Harper's Monthly, and a great many imprints. That made books cheaper. Another thing that made them cheaper is that paper got much cheaper. Those of you who wrote dissertations had to type them out, print them out on cotton rag paper. And that's the paper at the top. It's essentially linen, but wood pulp fiber by the middle of the 19th century was in common use for newspapers. Unfortunately, much of it high acid, and you see it fraying below. Incidentally, all of you, I hope, still have some cotton rag paper on your possession. That is, your dollar bills are still on rag paper. That's why if you wash them in your jeans, you can dry them out, and it's linen, essentially. You can't do that with your paper money. So that additionally lowers the cost of books. But the third thing that lowered the cost of books is the mechanical binder. And we don't think of that, but I think some of you who are librarians are bookbinders. In fact, I saw the name. Some of you I know for a fact are. That is, to bind a book in leather is an operation as complicated, with the same measuring and cutting and sewing of leather, as complicated as making a nice pair of leather shoes. So this added to the cost of books, but now they are They are stitched by machine. As a result, books now are added with fantastic speed to libraries. And I'm going to show you how this created a trauma for the library. The traditional library put the books at arm's length, which worked if your collection, like the library company, was only about 8,000 books. But here's a library with 200,000 books. This is the National Library in Vienna. That is the library of the Imperial Austrian, of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, designed by Fischer von Erlach, a great surging Baroque upheaval of form in the middle, swelling, bulging. Here's the plan. It is all one continuous space, divided neatly down the middle. The Baroque loved the dynamics of the oval. It centralizes like a circle, but with a pneumatic direction. It's all one space, and it's got one of the most fantastic cataloging systems of any library. This will horrify you librarians. On the left are the books devoted to war. On the right, the books devoted to peace, the art of war and peace in one room. And there's the allegorical painting of war on the left side. But it's too big to control the books, and the books keep pouring in. What has to happen now is a division between the storage of books and the reading of books. And that happened half a century later with the building of the Bibliothèque Sainte-Geneviève in Paris, the world's first modern library. Modern, not just that in its laconic mute expression, its Neo-Greek style. This is the Neo-Greek of the modern French Academy, which answers the question, what would the Greeks do if they had had the arch? What would they do if they'd have iron? And the answer is they would have used them with sublime rationality and clarity. But what's really modern about it, it's a public library to be used by the public at night, which means it had to be fireproof because of gas lighting. So the whole thing is built of iron and stone. And what it did was store the books below. That's the lower level with the small windows. The reading room is lifted above. You enter through the building below to the stair up there, and then you enter the building itself, which is a glistening chalice of light. There it is, filigree thin iron. This modern library changed the expectation of what a library should do. It should allow the librarian to control the books, to catalog them, store them efficiently, safely, and bring them judiciously to the reader when needed. And immediately, America's libraries noted that. Boston did on top, New York did. Boston Public Library stole the whole program. The great reading room at the front of the Boston Public Library, you see at the bottom here, the book stacks pushed to the back there, gave you across the front of the building, like the Bibliothèque Sainte-Geneviève, in this first nationally important building by McKim, Mead and White, one of America's greatest reading rooms. The whole length of the building is one spectacular vaulted space. Same with the New York Public Library, whose completion inspired Philadelphia finally to finish the free library. And there it is, but it's interesting. This building is not, as in Boston, on Copley Square, a gracious public square. It's on a busy thoroughfare, Fifth Avenue, and it would not do to put the reading room so close to the sound of the city. So what Carrere and Hastings did, rather, was to push the reading room to the back of the lot, facing Bryant Park there, sitting gloriously, possessively above all the tiers of book stacks below it. Well, why didn't this happen in Philadelphia? Well, you see right away, because we do not have a long tradition of university education. University of Pennsylvania comes late into Philadelphia history. Our library culture is private, determined by private philanthropy, and typically by the whims of the patrons, some of which were weird. This is one of our weirdest patrons. He had a fortune of $1.1 million. This is James Rush, eccentric son of Benjamin Rush, Philadelphia physician, signer of the Declaration of Independence. When he died in 1869, he drew up a will mandating that his fortune be lavished on the building of a new library, which he hoped the library company would then move into. But all sorts of fussy codicils were added. It had to be at Broad and Catherine, for one thing. He gave the dimensions of the building. He wanted a Greek Doric building, which is now fantastically out of date. He also insisted that there be no, in the library, there would be never any public lecture, no paintings would be hung, no sculpture, and not a penny of his fortune would ever be devoted to the providing of lunches or refreshments to the members of the board. He also insisted that his wife, his father-in-law, and he himself be buried in the building, which aggravated one Philadelphia critic who said, "What a strange program for a library without paintings or statues, but a library with skeletons in the basement." But unfortunately, even though it went to suit, unfortunately, the will could not be cracked, which gave us one of Philadelphia's strangest architectural objects, and certainly one of its unhappiest library, the Ridgeway Library. There's the model made by Addison Hutton. There's the plan. There's the great space of the reading room. And very begrudgingly and reluctantly, the library company accepted this gift. But it distressed them no end, because what it seemed to do was efface the memory of the brilliant creation of Benjamin Franklin, the library company. What it did was nudge them into making their own new building, because their other building facing Independence Hall was now far away from the growing center of the cultural life of Philadelphia, which had moved to Broad Street, not South Broad Street, unfortunately. So shortly after the opening of the Ridgeway branch of the library company, as they called it, the library company decided to build themselves a new building at 13th and Locust. And naturally, the choice this time was Frank Furness, who was given explicit directions that the library should recall as much as possible the lines of the original building. And there's Frank Furness's winning perspective for that competition, which is a Victorianized version of the building. But in his muscular way, I like that explosion of roof on the roof line of chimneys and ventilators. But look what he does. He takes the statue of Benjamin Franklin and he raises it. It's in the second story. In the original building, he raises it one story to elevate it to a place of glory at the top. Well, that statue is going to move around a lot in Philadelphia's history. If you want to see the statue, ravaged as it is, go to the third house of the library company, which is now next to the Historical Society, where the statue sits in state below under protective glass. Well, Frank Furness with the Library of Company was given a very difficult position, and in a way, an unhappy job, because what he had to do was insert his library into a building whose shell was mandated by the requirement that it recall the original building. And the library he put into it was emphatically an old-fashioned institution. It was still a gentleman's reading room. And if you look at the library company as built by Carol Grisdale Van Allen, 1965 on Locust Street, it does not indicate openness to the public. It realized by this point that it had essentially become an archival collection. So the building has something of that closed citadel character. Very different, though, the character of Frank Furness's library at the University of Pennsylvania, which is one of our most Philadelphian libraries. Let me tell you a story about this. I gave a lecture some years ago to the retired professors of Bryn Mawr, Haverford, and Swarthmore College, a very interesting group, very feisty group. And one woman approached me afterwards, elderly, who had taken classes at Penn during World War II. And she said, "Professor Lewis, we all believe that the Furness Library," and she told me the story of how it was created, "we all believe that the Furness Library was built by the University of Pennsylvania in great haste, and needing to settle a design quickly, they went to the Pennsylvania Railroad and asked if they had any unused design for train stations. They had one available, and that was the Furness Library. And I assured the woman, no, this was not true. I understand why you might say that, because if you look at the exposed metal truss of the reading room of the Furness Library, it will remind you of the exposed metal truss of the B&O station by Furness at 24th and Chestnut. And when you walked to the library, when you took the B&O Railroad, you would have made a logical connection. But no, it's an urban legend. And an urban legend is what people find convenient to explain what is otherwise inexplicable, which is, why does this building look so weird? Why so belligerent and truculent and so metallic? Well, it turns out this is one case where the urban legend, to my great chagrin and mortification, was true. And I found this out later. I wish I could have told the woman. When Frank Furness was given the job to design the library by the head of the building committee, his brother Horace Howard Furness, the first thing he did was to engage as consultants America's two leading librarians, Justin Windsor, head of the Boston Public Library, and Melville Dewey, creator of the Dewey Decimal System. And together, the three men devised the plan of the Furness Library. And what I learned, what I didn't know when this woman told me the story of the Furness Library, what I didn't know is that Justin Windsor had published an article in the Journal of the American Library Association, which was founded in Philadelphia, incidentally, in 1876. Justin Windsor had published an article on the problem of designing a modern library because of the incessant need to expand. And he determined that the best model for any library was not any existing library, but rather a train station, in particular the Boston Provident train station, because it had two parts. It had a part in the front that was essentially ceremonial for gathering people together, and it had a part in the back, the train shed, that could be extended infinitely. That was the engineering in the back was a storage zone, and the front part was a public zone. And he proposed that it would be very easy to turn the plan of that train station into a library. The head house, the part for people in the front, very easily convert to the waiting room, and the train shed, you could very easily convert to the book stack. And he wrote there, the cases could be continued indefinitely. And there's another librarian who doesn't know how to spell. I think you need to, indefinitely. This was the model for Furness. Also, there's the section. You could take the great waiting room, roof it with glass, store it with books. And here's what Furness did. His first plan, which is wonderfully left open at the end, shows how the book stacks could be extended ad infinitum as new books are added. And there you see it with the first three bays of the library as it opened in 1891. And the building was remarkable. We see this as some assertive Victorian performance of eccentricity. But in fact, every part of it was judiciously sculpted to the task it had to perform. For one thing, the stair hall was moved out of the building, so the sound of people going upstairs would never penetrate into the library proper. To the right are the book stacks. And then we have three different types of reading room, because Furness said there are three types of readers. There's the hasty casual reader who wants to come in, browse restlessly, maybe for a half hour looking at the newspapers. This is a loud space. Then there is a quieter space where people want to spend half a day reading. And then there are spaces that require absolute silence for study. And these are the alcoves or seminar rooms that could be shut off. And that is very different than the Boston Public Library, which Philadelphians proudly pointed out. The Boston Public Library made no such distinction. For them, all readers are the same, all hurled together. Philadelphia identifies, catalogs, and distinguishes the readers as it does the books. Even look at the distinction between the two reading rooms. The loud one is sealed off with these low slung arches from the quieter one, and then facing this corona of study carols below that gorgeous iron truss. And this is the image that haunts me to this day. This is Furness's perspective, which shows the stacks extending endlessly into space. He calculated, this is again Philadelphia pragmatism, that the wall could be extended on movable screws at a rate that new volumes could be housed at 30 cents per book. Unfortunately, an Irvine Auditorium was built there, thwarting the scheme. Now, I've been coy with you. I haven't told you about the Free Library, why that took so long to build. And the answer, again, is a peculiarly Philadelphian story. It's our eccentric tradition of private philanthropy. Here's another philanthropist, George S. Pepper, who also had a fortune of upwards of $1 million that he, in his will, mandated be devoted to the building of a library. But having watched the fiasco of the Ridgeway Library, he did not want to meddle at all. In fact, unfortunately, he didn't meddle enough because he allowed his executors to determine who should get the money, but he felt it should be given to one Philadelphia library to become an official public library of Philadelphia. And of course, a scramble for the spoils began. The Hearst Library tried to get it, the Philadelphia Institute. The library company for a time thought about doing it. The Mercantile Library made its own bid, causing great indignation among the members. One of them hilariously said, "I have not been paying $4 a year for all these years to a public library." You kind of, you can feel the quivering resentment of the hordes he saw stomping into his private sanctuary. But there were other protests. One aggrieved woman librarian wrote in, and I just found this reference the other day in the Enquirer, wrote in to say, do you realize you will at one fell swoop throw into unemployment some 40 to 50 women librarians in Philadelphia? 40 to 50 private libraries had their own librarians. Well, I have to put in a plug for the institute that's hosting me tonight. The first branch of the Philadelphia Free Public Library was in the Wagner Free Institute of Science, and it opened within 2 years of the death of Pepper. It's because the Wagner Institute had its own library, and it was set up with its system of classrooms. It was set up to convert a few of them. Here I'm showing you both the Wagner's own library and the Free Library is initially instituted, was in a position to receive the gift. We don't know how they were able to open so fast with a complete collection. And the assumption is, but this is something that Lynn Dorwalt, the librarian of the Wagner, will have to tell us. My assumption is that they were given a substantial part of George Pepper's own book collection. By 1901, they had in mind building a more lavish version of the branch of the Free Library. The Philadelphia architects George and William Hewitt were engaged to expand the Wagner. And I wish that portico had been built, that grand portico that would have served as a frontispiece, giving admittance to two wings of the library. Only the one to the right was built, opening in 1902. And it is an exquisite little jewel box of a library with a skylight, four cast iron columns supporting it. But it was never completed because the Free Library now took on a momentum of its own. Its first official home was a defunct concert hall on Chestnut Street. There it is. And it was a bit, they moved in very quickly in the early 90s. It was a bit of an unpleasant building for the library. You can recognize you are still in the in the auditorium of a concert hall. The seats have been ripped out. Even more unpleasant was the children's library below. And if you realize the one thing a concert hall has to be, it has to have a strong flooring system to hold all the Philadelphians above it. So the children's library below was dominated by that muscle-bound roof truss above. Look at those poor children huddled below it. Well, we have the tradition that all of our libraries in Philadelphia are hermit crabs. So the Free Library then moved from the concert hall into the abandoned College of Physicians here. This building by Wyndham, added by Chandler for a short time. But it was, by now it was destiny that the true and proper place of the Free Library would be on our axis of culture, the Philadelphia Parkway, as it runs from Philadelphia City Hall at the right through Logan Circle to culminate grandly and gloriously at the Philadelphia Art Museum, where with this soaring play of axes turns to monumental sculpture and then dissolves into the freedom of landscape, Fairmount Park above. If you look at that, from the beginning, it was clear that Logan Square would be turned into a circle and there would be a pair of matching buildings to grace it. And here are those buildings. So when Trumbauer was engaged to place the Free Library here, it was always clear that the building would have a twin, and there is the twin, originally the municipal courts, then the family courts. And appropriately, the only place where you have a grand public square with two matching buildings is of this quality is the Place de la Concorde in Paris, which you see there below. The architect was Horace Trumbauer, and we have his earliest design, well, one of his earliest designs, made in consultation with the librarian John Ashurst. And right away, in the beginning, Trumbauer seizes the idea of the building. That is, book stacks placed in the back, reading room in the front, in the upper story. So there's the book stacks in the back, the grand ceremonial entrance, the specialized periodical rooms and reference rooms. The main reading room, unlike the New York Public Library, thrust boldly and proudly right to the street to face Logan Circle. But now we don't build reading rooms like this anymore. And the final chapter of my story today is what has happened since the crystallization of the Free Library. This is what happened. We don't expect books to be kept away from the people anymore. We expect books and people to vibrate playfully against one another. This is the new culture that happens in America, everywhere in America, in the 1950s with the open office cubicle. This is a rather grim depiction of it. This is, if you recognize the movie Jack Lemmon, In the Apartment. This is the idea. It really comes out of the Bell Labs, that people need to talk to other people at the workplace and exchange ideas creatively and fertily in the workplace. You don't keep people apart in cubicles. You bring them together. And you see it in Philadelphia in one of our few heroically modern libraries. Alas, now, as Ken Finkel and Inga Saffron have been following, one of our most ravaged libraries, the last stand of the Mercantile Library on Chestnut Street, this building of 1953 by Sidney Martin. This is the library as open as could be. There is no facade, there's only glass. And from the street, you can look in and see the books. This is an idea actually that comes out of the branches of the New York library system. The idea was that immigrant families coming from authoritarian cultures were not used to the freedom of an American public building. They were used to police and watchmen and guarded entrance. So New York had the idea, McKim, Mead, and White did all the branches of the New York Library. They had the idea that the public should see no barrier between entrance and the movement up to the books. And in this wonderful cross section, you see that. You enter an open space and the books unfold before you without barrier. And behind you, you have a little lozenge of nature. And if you look at the plan of that, you enter here, the charging desk, you can stop there if you want. You can relax here at the lobby, but there is no barrier to you moving straight up to the books. And when you find the books, you find comfortable lozenges of space placed in a relaxed fashion throughout the library. And your journey ends at the back with this gravel garden and view of nature. The architect, Sidney Martin, was a 70-year-old distinguished architect. You know his work if you know the power plant at the University of Pennsylvania on the South Street Bridge. Unfortunately, our greatest library architect never built a library in Philadelphia. I wish he had. It was Louis Kahn. There's his Exeter Library, built during these same years, 1965. This is perhaps America's greatest modern library. And it addresses this problem of the storage of books and reading of them in the most elegant way imaginable. The lobby is now in the middle of the building, a luminous well of space. The book stacks are around it, huddling it, caressing it. And near the light are the reading carrels. So Kahn said the idea of is you come into the library up the stair here, experience the light, and you want to take a book and bring it to the light. And there is the great interior of it. We have nothing quite this good, but Philadelphia has now embraced the idea of abolishing this traditional division of book storage and book reading. Right now on hold is Moshe Safdie's plan for this very ambitious enlargement of the Free Library to the north. And here's an interesting sequence of images. Here is the book stack being built in 1925, 7 tiers, able to hold more than 1 million volumes in the Free Library. There you see it going in, and there you see it going out as the Free Library embraces off-site storage. The idea now is the books, you have to order them, they're delivered daily, and instead here's Moshe Safdie's rendering of turning that embedded volume of space in the building to a great space of the public. One of these computer-generated renderings. They're meant to look appealing. I always find them strangely ghostly. Anyway, our newest library strangely goes back to Frank Furness for its greatest insight. This is the Charles Library, Temple University, by the firm of Snowhead. An ingenious piece of urban planning because it realizes that the passage of movement on the Temple campus is diagonal. So a slit is cut through the building on a diagonal. Very welcoming processional path to the books. Very open, free-form public spaces below. The columns are tilted. Here are the pilotes of the building, kind of hippo style, almost Egyptian processional path upwards. And the building gives you every possible variety of reading space. Formal ones, traditional desks, spaces with views where you can gather and arrange the seating, and some very, very delicious passages of solitude in light and space. But what does this have to do with Frank Furness? It has this thing to do. Snowhead, designed by that firm, particularly Craig Dykers, realized that to order a book from offsite storage takes too long, because when you are searching a footnote from a rare book, you really need it today, not Thursday. So look at this zone of the book. Dykers recognized that it's possible to put offsite storage on site. What you are looking at are the book bots. Squeezed and tucked together. I see this as packing before a long trip, a suitcase beyond the amount of clothes a suitcase should reasonably hold. How do you get 1 million books into this library? Well, you cram them into these metal chests, higgledy-piggledy, but you scan it before you put it in. So you don't have to carefully shelve them. The computer does the shelving for you. And then the books are taken by a robot into 5 of these channels, which are 150 feet long, 55 feet high, and a robot arm moves them, retrieves the box with your book in it. It slides down. I picture Tom Cruise or James Bond rappelling up that dangerous place. And you have the book in minutes. It's like nothing I've ever seen. So we have here an embrace of technology and reading absolutely without sentiment. There's no sentimentality that the book is a precious jewel that has to be treated with reverence. A book is an active thing that's an active part of life, and modern engineering in our pragmatic city should make the book available to us. So let me end with this thought. Here is the last image of the library company. I say we're an unsentimental city. Well, we are and we aren't. This is the facade of the library company, stolen, well, I guess we use the word appropriated, by the American Philosophical Society, pasted on the facade of their building built in 1954. And strangely, this facade is by the same architect, Sidney Martin, who gave us the fantastically modern Mercantile Library. But I want you to look again at Ben Franklin. The statue was recarved. What does Ben Franklin have in his arm? He has a scepter. His arm rests on a stack of 8 books, but the scepter has been turned down to tell you that books make ideas. And one of the ideas you can extract from a book is the idea that you must fight tyranny. And Ben Franklin helped fight the tyranny of the English Empire. So in Philadelphia, books aren't precious jewels to be treated as religious relics. Books are alive, active, dangerous things with consequences, and so should the libraries be in which they're housed. So that's my talk, and let's talk about it.
Sorry. Thank you for that talk. And the first question is, who is the Temple Library named for?
Mr. Charles was the donor, very generous donor, and I forget his first name. I wrote about it. I'm sorry. Someone here will immediately send it to me. Probably.
At least you're not the one who owes him the credit for it.
Yeah.
Is there a future for a great browsing libraries? Is Van Pelt endangered?
Oh, I think these things happen in curves. I think 20 years ago, there was a belief that we were going to move to a completely digital reading culture. And now I find a great longing for the presence of physical books. That is my belief. I was on the building committee of the Williams College New Library by BCJ, Peter Bolin. And to my surprise, there was great enthusiasm, not just among the faculty, but the students and the trustees for building a library. So I think there is an appetite and a love of books that I believe will continue to rise, but I'm interested in what librarians might have to say about that.
I know I've seen some things, I don't follow this trend closely, but about small independent bookstores kind of coming back after so many stores went out of business and so many of the big ones.
Apparently, as long as there's a coffee bar, people are happy to be with books.
With 2 main needs. Any thoughts on the many branches of the Free Library or the influence of Carnegie on the buildings?
My thoughts are, they're all great. I felt sheepish that I didn't talk about them. They're part of the life of Philadelphia. Philadelphia is a fantastically decentralized city. And everywhere you have a branch of the Free Library, it is essential to the identity of the community. And they're all almost all of them are by first-rate architects. So I didn't talk about them. Carnegie, yeah, Carnegie's wave came a little earlier, and they learned from Carnegie. But I knew I would get in trouble for not showing one of them.
If anyone has taken their classes at the Falls of the Schuylkill branch, that's one of the Carnegie libraries.
Oh, right, yeah.
Have you written a book? I'm not sure if this is about a book about libraries, or as someone who has written a book, if you have feelings about libraries.
Some articles I wrote about Furness's library at the University of Pennsylvania. I wrote a review in the Wall Street Journal of the Temple Library, and I've written a bit about Furness, but no, I have not done a book about libraries. There should be a good book about libraries. And I see half a dozen names and the people who signed up who are more capable on it than I am. There's Kent Finkel, he's one.
And someone wonders, says the engineering at Temple is great, but I miss the ability to wander the stacks and discover a hidden treasure. Are those days gone forever?
Well, no, Temple's interesting. They decided that there are 15% of the Temple collection is in the stacks on the 4th story. So they did want books there. So they're striking a balance. And I think it's a good balance rather than offsite storage. The buildings are in-house. You can get them in a matter of minutes. And the books that are used most are there. And it's a horrible calculus. The offsite storage calculus is, well, this book has not been used in the last 40 years. Off it goes. But a good library is where you find the rare thing that you might make 1 or 2 discoveries a year, but you will not make that discovery if all those books are offsite.
Yeah, that was a lot of my procrastinating in college, was wandering the stacks. I hope those days stick around. How does the interior of the American Philosophical Society's library compare to the original library hall?
Oh, it has no reference to it. It's a great interior, but it was designed unself-consciously. That was a piece of urban furniture, and it was exactly the right thing to put there. But the interior is a modern, well-built. I've done research there. It's great space, but no, it's not. It would have been wrong to recreate that reading room.
Mm-hmm. There's a comment that the Free Library has several Carnegie libraries, but he wouldn't give the money for Parkway Central.
I've heard that. Well, what he didn't want was to pay for pomp. He wanted libraries for the people, and he recognized that this was a monument.
And anything else to say about the Philadelphia-ness of libraries, or of the libraries?
The Philadelphia-ness. Well, no, I think I advanced some ideas that our love of small private rooms. We're a private city. Things are done privately. Our pragmatic nature, how it's played out in different ways, and maybe. But I present them not as facts, and I wanted to give some provocative thoughts and see how people respond.
Mm-hmm. We have a lot of comments on libraries and library history. Are there any other questions? So, didn't the Cheney University of Pennsylvania educated African-American architect Julian Abel, who worked under Horace Trombauer, also helped design the Free Library building at 18th and Vine?
Absolutely, yeah, Julian Abel, and we don't know enough about him. Yeah, Julian Abel was the first, as far as I know, the first Black graduate from the University of Pennsylvania School of Architecture. And he worked for most of his career for Trombauer. And it's a really interesting partnership because it tells us it's an unusual collaboration. Trombauer, I don't think, was a great architect. He was a great businessman. In this respect, he's like Daniel Burnham of Chicago, who was an organizational genius who could hire good designers. So his architecture really has no personality. Furness's architecture, you see the face of Frank Furness in the buildings. You don't with Trombauer. So Trombauer ran an efficient shop. And I don't think anybody else would have been as kind to Abel as Trombauer was. In fact, when Trombauer died, apparently of cirrhosis of the liver, which is a story in its own right, Abel carried on the firm for the final years. But the protocol is, if you work for a businessman architect like that, you do not get credit, and the designs never have your name on it. But reading between the lines, Abel, yes, played a major part in it, but it's really a selfless part because he was given the task of inserting a library into a pre-existing French shell. So that it had to take a willingness to suppress your own ego, and there's something sad about that. We need to know more about it.
How has the transformation of libraries from a place for books into multimedia centers affected their design?
It affected their design. Well, a lot more cozy spaces with informal seating. That there's been a will to avoid anything that seems axial, ceremonial, excessive dignity. In my lifetime, I've seen libraries get loud. Up until the 1970s, the silence of a library was the silence of the tomb. The sign said silence, and where people are used to a little more background noise. And in a way, I think that change of the culture of the library is more powerful than some of the physical changes in them.
Was Rush buried at the Ridgeway Library, and is that where Kappa is now?
I think Rush has been moved, if I'm not mistaken, to the current Free Library. I believe he's there. Well, this is a Philadelphia tradition. Everyone imitates. Stephen Girard got buried under the steps of Girard College, where he still is. William Wagner got buried in the Wagner Free Institute of Science, but later, I believe his widow took him out, so he's not there. And so this is a Philadelphia tradition.
And for a while, some of our books were in his crypt, I think.
Books were in the crypt. That's good on-site storage, fireproof. Yeah.
Someone asks why Bibliothèque Saint Geneviève needed to be designed for nighttime.
Oh, well, so designed 1838, opens 1850. It's a parallel with the Wagner Free Institute of Science. The Wagner's lectures were and still are in the evening. That means workers can come and be educated. And William Wagner, a great philanthropist, thought in the modern age of science and industry, the worker has to be educated. And you can't go during working hours, so you do it at night. And that was the same impulse behind the Bibliothèque Saint Geneviève, that artisans, craftsmen, tradesmen of every sort could work a full day and then go and read a book by gaslight till I think 9, maybe even 10 at night. It's really amazing that we don't understand how important lighting is. You only have gas lighting after 1800. Before that, it's candlelight. And lots of candles to light a room. And gaslight is the first lighting revolution. But because gas is very dangerous, you have to have incombustible materials. So that's the metal and masonry, or the metal and masonry library.
Any thoughts on the architectural merits or lack thereof of the current library company building? Has it aged well?
You know what? I'm fonder and fonder of the architecture of the 60s as I see more and more of the architecture in Philadelphia today. It was built at a time of retreat from downtown Philadelphia, and it's a bit of a stronghold. It tells you it's a strong box for precious objects. It doesn't open to the street. So I don't like that aspect, but they've more than redeemed themselves by restoring Frank Furness's house next door.
If you could save only one library in Philadelphia, which one would you choose?
Oh, this is sheer idiot, sheer, what do I call it? Prejudice on my part. The Furness Library. It's the building I love. The libraries of our youth are the libraries we love forever. Yeah, that's the one.
It's a good choice. It's probably more books than some of the options. There's a question to tell us more about the bookmobile that Sue mentioned in the intro. Well,
I went to Mayfair Elementary School in the Mayfair district in the Northeast, and in 1966 or 7, there was a bookmobile that every week would come to certain streets, and it was a little van And the idea of books on wheels was intriguing to me. I took them out. I had a library card. I would have to ask one of you librarians there to tell me about the program and when it discontinued. But that was my first encounter with the Philadelphia library system.
I think I see if anyone follows our Instagram. I posted this today, and it's of the Northeast branch that replaced the bookmobile, and the description said that people were complaining that they just had a bookmobile and no library, and this is a conveyor belt in the 1960s that they had to bring books from storage down to the workroom.
What a great
It was very high tech.
Wow. So is that the story, that the Northeast, because we didn't have a branch, sent the roving bookmobile around?
No, library historians. So if anyone isn't following the chat, there's a lot of added details there and a bunch of book suggestions, which seems appropriate. Any other questions? Looks like that's it. Ken Finkel posted that he has a blog post about the Philadelphia's 25 Carnegie Branch libraries. There's a recommendation for the book Brilliant, The Evolution of Artificial Lighting. And also Susan says that the books were never kept in the crypt, but some of the records were, and Wagner is now buried at West Laurel Hill Cemetery.
Bring him back.
Yeah, there's room in there now. Oh, and one more question is, what do you think of the Seattle Main Library, if you're familiar?
Oh, you know, I am very, very aware of it. Rem Koolhaas. I was going to show it, but it's not a Philadelphia library. It's great. What it does is take the horizontal library and make it vertical. It's a wonderful helix. Herbert Muschamp of the New York Times called it a library encased in a fishnet stocking. It goes up in these oblique moves, and you ride an escalator to the reading room at the top. And as you go up the escalator, you move through the stacks, and you see behind glass walls all the books there. So it's a great, it's one of the few libraries the last 20 years that is breathtakingly innovative. I should have mentioned it, but it wasn't in Philadelphia. Why can't we do things like that?
Someday, maybe. And our last question is, any comments about the Philadelphia City Institute?
Don't know enough about it. That is one of those, and there were a great many, like the West Philadelphia Institute, a great many of these local cooperative associations that, in a way, the success of the free library caused all of them to atrophy. And it goes back to that prediction of the woman who said, we're going to put 40 or 50 female librarians out of work. I see you're wrapping up, so I just want to thank everybody for being here. And
yeah, thank you all for coming, and thank you for doing this talk.
Yeah, I just want to thank Mike for another great talk, and we're always lucky when you're on sabbatical to grab you for a program. So we hope to have you back again soon.